the, got it, thank you. The August edition of ChangeMakers on Tuesdays. Welcome everybody from all around the country. Now that was the girl from Ipanema, I think, is our hold music. That was Stan Getz. Did Stan Getz write that, or did he just cover it? Anyone know? If anyone knows, drop the answer in the chat and you'll get a special prize that Karen Murphy will post to you. So welcome everybody. We'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands, or wherever you're joining us from today. I'm joining you from Brisbane, so I'm on Turrbal country. And you might like to drop in the chat where you're joining us from, in the First Nations community where you are. Or if you like, you can adjust your name title by clicking on the three dots in the top right-hand corner of your own little window, and you can add where you're coming from after your name, if you like. So welcome everybody, I'm Matthew Cox. I'm with the Australia Together Alliance, and we're very happy to put on ChangeMakers on Tuesdays every month on the second Tuesday of every month at 12:30. We're able to do that because the Department of Social Services gives us some financial support to do that. And we're lucky we've got a fantastic events team behind ChangeMakers on Tuesdays, and that's Collaboration for Impact, and particularly Michelle. Give everyone a wave, Michelle. There is the fabulous Michelle who makes all of this happen. So welcome everybody. We're going to record the session today. If you missed the previous sessions, you've missed Jay Weatherall talking about the Thrive by 5 campaign and early learning. And last month you missed Adrian Pazarski talking about the housing affordability crisis. So if you go to the CFI hosted Platform C website, you can see some of those recordings if you want to catch up. But today we're blessed with a fantastic guest speaker, the CEO of ARACY, the very lovely colleague, Penny Dakin. Hi, Penny.
Hey, Matthew. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Now, for those of you who don't know what ARACY is, let's start there, Penny. What's ARACY?
Sure. So in the broadest terms, ARACY is a for-purpose intermediary. So what that means is we like to take something that everybody else or other people have got on offer and turn it into things that are useful for other people. So we talk about our mission, our purpose as an organisation is to catalyse change by bringing people, all of the amazing people on the ground who are doing work for children and young people. We want to bring people and we want to bring knowledge, all of the knowledge that's generated through on the ground, through lived experience, through academia and research. And we want to put people and knowledge together to catalyse change.
And ARACY stands for the Australian Research Alliance for Children and Youth, or Children and Young People?
Children and youth, it does, yes.
Very good. Now, last year, ARACY, with a few partners, did something very important. It held a National Early Years Summit in Melbourne, I think 2 days before lockdown from memory. Tell us about the National Early Years Summit.
Yes, and you may well joke, Matthew, but I will never recover from holding a national event 2 days before lockdown and learning that insurance policies don't cover acts of God, and pandemics are considered acts of God. Something that has caused my blood pressure to escalate very high. So we brought about 450 people, leaders at various levels within the systems that wrap around children, young people and their families together in Melbourne for 2 days to discuss the current situation in relation to early childhood development in Australia, to put some unusual voices on the table and in front of this group of leaders, and then to come up with, hopefully, a blueprint that would take us from where we are, the current state, to where we'd like to be, a future state for early childhood development in Australia. We did that. We brought all of those people together. We put them on tables of 10. We put a thought leader on each of those tables, and what we called a knowledge translator who took copious notes and recorded a whole heap of information. We put provocateurs on stage and amongst the audience, and we asked them to challenge people's thinking about children and young people, particularly in the first 1,000 days. And then we had a team, a little engine room out the back representing the organisations who sort of come together to create this summit, us and Murdoch Children's Research Institute, Families Australia, Perinatal Infant Mental Health Research Institute, and a number of others. And we synthesized like crazy all of the amazing knowledge that was being generated by the people on the ground. We did that in the midst of Melbourne preparing to lock down. And at the end of the 2 days, we created a very, very high level blueprint that would guide future actions in relation to the first 1,000 days of children in Australia. And we agreed through a number of people putting up their hands and volunteering and saying that they wanted to be part of what the next steps look like. They didn't want the event to be a talk fest. They wanted to create something more, that we would go away and pull together a leadership for this work into the future.
And so a whole lot's happened in the last year, and that leadership group's been beavering away. Most people on the call probably wouldn't be familiar with all of the work that's happened. So give us a little précis of what's happened since the summit, which was last March, wasn't it?
It was. So since that time, we did go away, and the summit organisers and other people who were either identified or who had put their hand up and said, I want to be part of shaping what this could look like into the future. We applied for a very small grant from the Australian Communities Foundation to just tide us over while we thought about what we should be doing, while we looked deeply at the work that had come out of the summit. And then we were very, very fortunate to be introduced to the BHP Foundation, who really liked the idea of what we were trying to do, liked this idea of forming a field catalyst, a group of organisations who recognised that the things that we were trying to turn, the systems and the sectors we were trying to change, couldn't be changed by one organisation alone, and needed to have a group of organisations come together. And we used that small grant from the Communities Foundation, Australian Communities Foundation, to work with BHP to shape what an application to their sort of much larger granting could look like. We're very fortunate. We worked in a very co-designed way with BHP, and at the start of this year, BHP came on board and have funded the Early Years Field Catalyst for the next 18 months to do a really significant body of work around sector leadership capacity building, and particularly around helping us really cement through what will be a systems mapping piece, our perceptions of the desired state and the perceptions of a very, very broad group of people. The development of this systems map will be highly participatory, but also a desired state. So where we want to go, what that actually will look like, and then hopefully we'll get down to working with this group of participants to understand what those changes need to happen and what the best leverage points and interventions for us to do to actually go from where we are to where we want to be. We've all gone back to school. One of the really interesting things that's happened in this catalysing group, the leadership table, have all agreed that whilst we all come at it with this systems change piece with various pieces of knowledge, we are very mindful that we're all learning very much as we go. So we've all decided we've gone back to school together. We're all doing systems school. We're coming together for 2 hours on a Wednesday afternoon to really, I guess, lead by example within the organisations we represent, so that we can actually embed systems thinking more deeply into our organisations and ideally into the sector as well. We've also agreed to a development plan for ourselves in much the same way that we would come up with a personal development plan. We've come to the table and said, actually, as a leadership group, there's some stuff that we just don't know, and we've developed a plan for what that could look like. And we've also undertaken to make sure that we, as a group of leaders, come back to the sector wherever possible to talk about the work, to communicate about why we're doing what we're doing, how we're doing what we're doing, promote the participatory elements so that we do get those very, very wide perspectives included in the work. And the other thing that we've been doing, which is really, really exciting, Matthew, is we've been going back to that group of 450 summiteers, as they have affectionately become known, and asked them for input to things, and provided some common language and some key messages where there are big processes that are happening at a national level and more and increasingly now at a state level too. We're providing them with some insights that we have developed that can go into submissions. So we have catalysed some action amongst that summiteers group in commenting on the National Framework for Protecting Australia's Children. We've also catalysed that input from a different group of people from the summiteers who have provided comments around the review of the National Quality Framework. And we've actually even been so bold as to suggest that those two things should be aligned. And we've brought a number of people and a number of organisations on that journey with us. So we've been driving some action too, which is really exciting.
And a couple of people joined us just after we started. For those of you who've joined us a little late, our guest speaker this month is Penny Dakin, the CEO at ARACY. And we're talking the National Early Years Summit, which happened in March 2020, and all the work that's happened since then. A leadership group has been set up. A field catalyst is being designed to draw all of the sort of subsectors in the early years together into a national early years roadmap, Penny. So it's a pretty ambitious undertaking because we're not talking just the easy sector, we're talking child health, we're talking family support, talking the First Nations sector. So getting across all of those different contributors to early child development and getting everybody on the same page, getting everybody aware of who else is in the space is no small undertaking. What are we aiming for? What do you think it's going to look like in a year's time when we've done, a year's really good work on it?
Yeah, it's a great question, Matthew. And I don't really know. I know some stuff, but I'm also, I think one of the really important parts about this piece of work is we're actually laying ourselves open to possibility, which is something that I think we struggle with. I think we often come to processes like this with preconceived ideas and with our own agendas on the table. And I think one of the really refreshing things about the group of people who are sitting around the leadership table at the catalysing group, and I think with many of the people who we're speaking to as we start to get into our more participatory processes, are in fact actually laying aside preconceived notions and actually coming to it with a building on the foundational elements of the sectors that we come from, but also being open to change. So I guess in my head, in 12 months' time, when our funding for BHP winds up, I think one of the really exciting things is we will have a very deep, very comprehensive systems map. And I'm not talking service system, I'm absolutely talking genuine systems. So we're talking about mental models, we're talking about power, dynamics, we're talking about resource flows, all of those sort of core elements of system. We'll have a comprehensive systems map of early childhood development in Australia, which will be developed from as wide a stakeholder perspective as possible. I think we will have some better understanding of what desired state would be, where we would like to be, the things that we want for our children in their earliest period of their life. And I think that we'll have a better understanding of the things across various levels of the system, from individuals to families to communities to regions and jurisdictions, and then nationally, about the things that we will all be able to do to get from there to where we want to be. And then the thing I don't think we'll have, but I think that we'll be a lot closer to, is having agreement and consensus from all of those stakeholders about this being a statement of the where we are to the where we want to be, and hopefully some sort of plan about how we're going to get there. Like what does that look like from an investment perspective? What does it mean for philanthropy? This blueprint that we create, what does it mean for those people? What does it mean for government agency? What does it mean for community leaders on the ground? What does it mean for the organisations like mine? How do we take this thing and actually translate it into tangible action? I think we'll be much closer, and I think the work of the field catalyst for beyond the life of the funding agreement will be to drive that action. And I think that's pretty exciting.
Now, folks, if you've got a question for Penny, please just drop it in the chat and I'll tap you on the shoulder and ask you to put your question to Penny. So please do that if anyone wants to take up or make a comment or have any sort of question for Penny. I know Penny will be happy to take any questions. Penny, there's heaps happening in the early years space all across the country. How does this field catalyst and this early years system map project relate to things like the Thrive by 5 campaign, or say the work that the Front Project's doing, doing the policy and advocacy around the ECEC sector? How does it all slot together?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question, and we've worked very, very hard to make sure that the people who've come together to the leadership table of the Field Catalyst represent where possible as many of those initiatives as we can. We're very mindful that it is a very dense space at the moment. There's a lot of activity that has the potential to be unaligned and has the potential to be duplicative. And so what we're really working for in this group, so the group is co-chaired by Jane Hunt from the Front Project and I, and we are very mindful of the systems change work that is happening across the early years space at various levels. And I think it's really important. We're not just talking about national policy change. We're talking everything from that right through to actions that are being driven at a community level. So we've deliberately incorporated those people into this leadership group. So we've got representatives from the piece of amazing work that was done in partnership from the Every Child campaign and ANZOG last year. That work is being incorporated in it. The work that is coming from the Thrive by 5 campaign that is being led by the Centre for Policy Development, that's been incorporated. The work from the Front Project's incorporated. The work that ARACY is doing on establishing and engaging communities of practice, that all of that work's being incorporated. We're very mindful that this is about building on, not setting aside previous work. And so I think we've designed our group accordingly.
Great. Thanks, Paul's posed a question. Over to you, Paul. Do you want to put your question to Penny?
Can you hear me okay, Penny?
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks for describing what you're doing. I'm curious about the systems work that you spoke about and the conversations going on in that space, particularly as you mentioned power and how you're navigating that space around the politics where there's tension of ideas and competitors, and how you've kind of navigated that, really.
Yeah, look, it is really honestly probably the hardest thing about what we're doing. We've been very, very deliberate in forming this group up, the people who are represented on it, because we are aware that at the end of the day, often, at our level, we are potential competitors. I like to think of us as potential collaborators, but that's just the framing I try to bring to it. But that's mirrored here at this national advocacy level as much as it is, throughout various levels of the system. So we're naming it, we're actually calling it out. We've been very, very deliberate, I guess, about not letting the tensions that exist, tensions between ideas or potential power plays and all of those sort of things become something that clouds the work that we do. And by owning it, naming it, placing it on the table and actually openly talking about it, we went through a very extensive process at the beginning that was facilitated initially by our great friends at Collaboration for Impact, and then through other channels as well, of defining what our working together agreements would look like. We did a number of workshops to, I guess, shape that and to make sure that we call those things out. And we've worked with people who, as much as anything, are coming to represent the organisations they come from, but are actually there because of their ability to take on these adaptive leadership roles as well. So that's happening at the first level. I think when that's actually being mirrored back in the work that we're doing, I think one of the things that we're coming at this mapping piece, this systems mapping with the variety of mapping tools, because we know that it's really hard to always pick those things up through one method of systems mapping. So we've been, we did our first design workshop for this systems mapping piece last week. We had, it was supposed to be face to face. Everyone was going to come to Canberra. We're going to have lunch. It was going to be amazing. That didn't happen. So instead we did it over Zoom, which was, has all its challenges associated with it. But we spent a whole day workshopping what it would look like. And we talked about causal loop mapping. We talked about empathy mapping. We've talked about future state mapping. And we've come to, I guess, a feeling that we're going to have to use a combination of these tools to make sure that we do capture those elements of the system, particularly things around power and mental models, because we need to have as wide a set of inputs as possible to be able to build this image that we're trying to get to. I think one of the really important things about this work, and I didn't say it before and I really should, and it speaks to the generosity of the BHP Foundation. This will be a resource that will be publicly available. This is not something that's going to be locked away behind a firewall on somebody's website. I'm not going to own it. Jane's not going to own it. This systems mapping will be a public resource, and what we hope that people will be able to do with it is to be able to use it to influence and inform their own thinking and to understand the challenges across multiple levels of the system and make changes accordingly.
Thanks for the question, Paul. And what a great resource if we can get to that point where we've put some boundaries around what a national early years system is, and describe the relationships between the parts and just describe the future state we want to see. I think that's massively important. Lastly, Penny, just before we're out of time, how can people get involved, or is it just a bit early for them to get involved at the moment?
Look, it possibly is a tiny bit early, but only a very, very tiny bit. I guess one of the things that we need to do is make sure we have as full an understanding of who is out there and who is working in the early childhood development space, for want of a better word, who wants to be part of this participatory mapping. So if you are interested in being part of mapping, then let either Matthew and I, or I know, I guess, in the first instance, and my contact details are available. I know the website for ARACY has been shared. And we'll reach out if you know somebody who you think we should be talking to. If somebody's doing something interesting or has a different perspective, or even has a perspective that is not old, but just you believe should be really heard, let us know. And then when we come to do this mapping process, whatever those different types of systems mapping that we're going to do looks like, if we tap you on the shoulder and you're keen to participate, then please come with all of your thoughts and your thinking and the lived experience that as change makers that you're bringing to the table, because we won't know stuff unless people tell us.
Thanks so much, Penny. Really exciting piece of work. So everybody, if we'd like to thank Penny, we do that at ChangeMakers on Tuesdays using Auslan clapping, which is jazz hands. So please say thank you to Penny.
Thank you, everybody. It's really great to be here, and have a great rest of your meeting.
Fantastic, Penny. Please stay if you want to. If you've got a zip, no problem. We'll
Sadly, I have to zip. Talk to you later.
Yeah. Now, for those of you who are new to ChangeMakers on Tuesdays, we have a few standard segments. The first one is a guest speaker. We then go to some halftime entertainment, which we're hoping will be a cultural item from a different community around Australia. We've managed to get something from Logan, something from Bernie. And to tell us what we're about to view this month, we'll go to Karen. Karen, what are we about to see?
Thanks. I hope everyone can hear me through my mask. So today, given that we've had Jay Weatherall talk about Thrive by 5, we thought we would share some of the work that they've done. So you might have heard about the youngest ever TED Talk, but we'd like to share it with you today. So the Minderoo Foundation has partnered with TED to deliver one of the youngest TED Talks ever. It's supported by UNICEF for global distribution, and the reach that it's had is almost as amazing as Molly, who delivers the address to raise public awareness about the critical importance of brain development. So, Michelle, if you want to hit play, we'll hear Molly's TED Talk.
But that was the gist of it.
I've just shared it, Michelle, and the outline of how it was created, so people can have a look at that.
Wonderful. So that's a good teaser of the first few minutes of a 7-minute video. So thank you.
From memory, Molly lives on the Gold Coast, I think. So there you go. Amazing 7-year-old. My kids aren't quite like that. They can barely say hello, and one of them's 22. Anyway, yeah, check out the video at your leisure. The link's there in the chat. But what a lovely job our friends at Minderoo and Thrive by 5 did putting that one together. Okay, so now it's time for our breakout section where we get to meet each other in small groups. Now, some of you have been here before, so you'll know the drill. If there's anyone you don't know in the group, make sure you all introduce each other, because it's a large part of what we're trying to achieve here is come together people who are interested in change making, and particularly place-based change, particularly early child development based change, but not exclusively. We want you all to get to know each other and learn from each other and find out all the great things that are happening all around the country. So we're going to go into some breakout rooms for just a chat and for you to introduce yourselves to each other. If you do know each other, or if you get through the introductions pretty quickly, you might like to share an answer to this question. And the question is, what is the most important thing you're working on right now? So you could do that with your intro, or you could go through intros and come back to that question. We're going to have about 10 or 12 minutes for this breakout. So introduce yourself to all of your colleagues, and if you like, you can discuss anything you like, actually, but if you're stuck for something to talk about the most important thing you're working on right now, and Michelle will send us all off to breakout rooms. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you. So sending to rooms now for 12 minutes. Enjoy.
Welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a good chat. Did hands up if you met someone you didn't already know. Just about everybody. Fantastic. Was it long enough or too short? Hands up if it was too short. Okay, mainly too short. All right. We never get it right. Sometimes it's really quick and everyone says, oh, we want more time. Sometimes we give everyone more time. They think, oh, that was a bit boring. Anyway, I'm sure you're not boring. No, but I'll move on. Okay. Now we're going to get to our one of our favourite segments, which is Community of the Month, where we hear from one of you about what you're doing and about your community. Now we're always up for volunteers to be Community of the Month, or also to provide the halftime entertainment, a cultural item of some sort that you'd like to share. So if that is of interest to you, if you just look in the chat, you can either drop a note in the chat right now, or you can email Michelle and colleagues at Collaboration for Impact at the email address that's in the chat, which is learning@collaborationforimpact.com. So learning@collaborationforimpact.com. And we'd love more of you to get involved, to tell your story about your community and your project. And if you've got, particularly if you've got a cultural item you'd like to share, we'd love to hear from you. So either be brave and put your hand up in the chat and we'll follow you up. Or if you want to think about it a bit more, send us an email, or send Michelle and colleagues an email at learning@collaborationforimpact.com. Now, this month's Community of the Month is the community of Benalla in Victoria, and I'm very pleased to welcome Liz Chapman, who's the convener of Education Benalla. Liz, hello.
Hello.
Where the hell is Benalla?
Benalla is in northeast Victoria, 220k or so north of Melbourne. It's between more major centres of Wangaratta and Shepparton. So it went through all the issues in the 80s and 90s of decline, with public sector getting pulled out to those areas. It's a beautiful community. It's my home. It's also highly disadvantaged.
And how big is the town?
14,000 population, Benalla town and surrounding district. Yeah, so it has a very low median household income. It's recognised as being what's called persistently disadvantaged, meaning that even if more resources come in, it won't necessarily change anything. It has an art gallery, it has a lake in the centre, it has a track all around it for walking that goes through bushland. So it's a fairly typical inland town.
And I have it in my memory that rowing is a thing in Benalla on the lake. Is that true?
It used to be. So how long since you've been in Benalla?
Oh, about 30 years.
Yeah, it was a big thing about 30 years ago. Not so much now.
Not so much, right. So tell us about Education Benalla. How did it get started?
Well, probably everyone in this group will be aware of the Jesuit Social Services, the Vinson report on relative socioeconomic disadvantage. And it was when the 2007 report came out that showed that Benalla was in the worst top 40 of Victoria's 726 postcodes in terms of cumulative socioeconomic disadvantage. And it was Professor Vinson's comment that it was difficult to deny the centrality of limited education on the making and sustaining of disadvantage in Australia today that really made me sit up and take notice of that, because his work had been so beautifully done research that the 23 odd indicators of disadvantage that he looked at, he said that there was this one, which was educational attainment level, that linked to all the others. So Tomorrow Today Foundation is a community foundation. It had been formed and run in 2002, it launched. And so I'd been the inaugural chair. It had a board of directors that agreed to study this issue of disadvantage and its link to Benalla student outcomes. We formed a community advisory committee, which was 12 good citizens acting like a citizens' jury in effect. We talked to the regional manager of the Hume Regional Office of the Department of Education, and he very much came on board. He said the time was right for a relationship with philanthropy. So Tomorrow Today being Benalla's community foundation in partnership with the Department of Education, it seemed like a very good opportunity. So that community advisory committee had access to very sensitive data that the department needed to trust us wasn't going to appear on the front page. We really looked at all of the ins and outs of the links and what was possible. And that community advisory committee advised the board of Tomorrow Today on how to progress with an intervention. And it essentially advised the board that there was no one activity that was going to improve student outcomes in Benalla, that it would take time, it needed to be very patient, and it needed to intervene in children's and families' lives at many, many different points and in different ways to achieve an impact of actually improving Year 12 completion rates and improving the rate of completion of tertiary studies as well. So Education Benalla program had a year and a half of research and development after those recommendations. There was a lot of walking around Melbourne, knocking on doors, seeking to raise philanthropic funds to get it going. The program itself was designed with 4 aims, and talk about, you know, the great presentation from ARACY from Penny, because it was all about systems thinking. But our 4 aims are that all Benalla children start school ready to learn, bang. That there's improved literacy and numeracy levels. Our levels in Benalla have been appalling. It wasn't picked up that they were appalling because we were compared to like schools, and this is what needed to be a community intervention. All of the data compares, you know, oh, well, we shouldn't be too worried because they're only just below like schools. Well, hang on, why is it okay for children in disadvantaged areas to have poor school outcomes? Just run that past me again. So when you start to see it from our perspective as community, it's not okay. What we were saying was not okay. The 3rd aim is that the student assessed levels of wellbeing had to come up to average or better. It's appalling. And also we wanted to raise the educational expectations of families and of the community generally. So they are our 4 main aims. We managed to piece together funding. We got going 11 years ago.
That's 11 years that you've been going through. And I must say, flying a bit under the radar as well, Liz, because the results you've achieved are nothing short of astonishing, I think. Do you want to just share the progress you've made, say, on the AEDC numbers?
Yeah, sure. Well, as you'd be aware, the Australian Early Development Census every 3 years. The 2012 data was terrible. The 2015 data, we got going in 2010, and we have programs from 3 main sub-programs I didn't say. Early years, school readiness and early years is our first sub-program area. Future work focuses on aspiration and entrepreneurial skills and thinking skills for young people. And collaboration is our 3rd sub-program area, because it's all about the systems thinking. So it was going to be a number of years before we started to see an impact on the AEDC data. In 2015, we saw that the trend line wasn't as bad, so we thought we were starting to have an effect, which we should have been, and we thought we were starting to see that. In 2018, we saw the impacts coming through. So in 2015, 1/3 of all Benalla community children were assessed as developmentally vulnerable. So that was the worst level of vulnerability of any local government in Victoria. We were 79th out of 79 local government areas. In 2018, despite the fact that there was no change in Victoria numbers and no change in national numbers, we went from 1/3 of all Benalla children being developmentally vulnerable to 23.5%. Yay. So it was a very significant change. And of course, 23.5% isn't acceptable, but it's a big, significant change in terms of levels of vulnerability. So the proportion of children on track has significantly changed in 4 of the 5 domains under AEDC, and there's been no worsening in the 5th, just no significant improvement. That area is in an emotional maturity. There's no significant improvement yet. But we have significantly improved in the physical health and well-being, social competence, language and cognitive skills, and communication skills and general knowledge. In fact, so much so that in 2 of those areas, even though we're still a persistently disadvantaged community, we are at state average or better. So much for those, saying, like, always compare with like communities. We've got to compare on a state basis. And that's what we're going to affect and what we are impacting now.
That's incredible progress, Liz. I think, might be wrong, anyone on the call shout out, but I don't think I've heard of numbers changing to that degree in any of our projects around the country. So that's, pretty astonishing improvement. Interesting, going back to my previous life at Logan, we're at about year 3 or 4, that trend line stabilising and slight improvement was happening. And we'll find out this year whether we see the sort of improvements that we want to see in the AEDC. So it's interesting, isn't it? You've got to stick at it for a while. You've got to get those foundations in place, then things start to shift.
Yeah.
And so maybe it's at about year 6, 7, that's when it all starts to come together, perhaps.
Yeah, because it takes time to get the numbers as well. I mean, we were starting from 0 in terms of facilitated playgroups, for instance. We have what we call the Parents Early Education Partnership, which was a PEEP program, which we instigated in Victoria, along with, there were a few pick it up in Victoria at the time. And we really went hard on that in Benalla. But when there's initiatives, there's often, and this is where it comes back to place-based initiatives. If someone's running it because they got some funding, they may be happy to fit the number of programs each week to the funding that they achieve. Whereas we took a totally different position, which was that, I'm a volunteer. All of us volunteers are in it to see the change, and that's the place-based approach. And so we needed numbers. So there has to be that tipping point reached before you achieve the change. And just saying, yes, we run a PEEP program wasn't going to cut it. So between 24, we started in 2010, maybe 2011, delivering the early years programs. And it took, we started with 1 session a week, and then we went to 2 groups a week. And it takes a couple of years to build up to the numbers required. So it's at the point where now 80% of all families with early years children, with preschool children, 80% of all families have attended at least 1 semester of weekly PEEP program.
Yeah, it's the power of those population level approaches, isn't it? And as you say, doing what needs to be done, not what funding specifies. Yeah. Now we've got a couple of minutes left. If anyone wants to ask Liz a question, again, just drop it in the chat. We've probably got time for 1 or 2 more questions. Liz, just before we wind up, what do you think are some of the key interventions that you've put in place that have had the best effect, or is it the set that's had the effect?
It does have to be one of the big things that the Community Advisory Committee came back to say to the board, and one of the things we found on the Community Advisory Committee was there was no evidence at all. And as a rural development consultant at the time, I certainly felt there is no one intervention that's going to cut it, which you'd know very well, Matthew, too. It needs to be the number of times you weave in and out of people's lives and how you tailor it to need at the time. So it does need to be a number of approaches, but if there's one core strategy, to me, it is that systems thinking, that for there to be the changes to be embedded, for there to be sustainability around the changes, for it to result in measured change. It's not just schools talking to other schools, although that's really powerful. It's not just one charity or community group talking to another. It's the cross-sector through everything. So it's government agencies listening to community groups, listening to young people, listening to Main Street traders, and all the different sectors, civic, private, public, the service clubs, or everyone actually hearing each other and making sense of it in their own way, but doing something bigger than their little bit. And it is that cross-sector collaboration that I think is the core strategy.
Thanks, Paul, for your question. Paul's after any data or reports that you could direct him to. I'm sure people are, it's such an outstanding success story. I'm sure people would like to dig into the Benalla story a little more. Where would you direct people to?
Our website is Tomorrow Today, all one word, tomorrowtoday.com.au. And I think on our homepage maybe still is the presentation I did recently to the AEDC National Forum. And it has that sort of data in there. And then you can, on our website, see under publications some of the papers and whatnot as well.
Thanks, and thanks, Rosie. Rosie's dropped that website in there as well. Would you please thank Liz? Jazz hands. Auslan clapping. Thanks, Liz. Just a fascinating story, and just bubbling along, doing outstanding work, but not widely known to some of the rest of us. So welcome to the club, Benalla. You're actually well out in front, I reckon. So love to stay in touch and keep learning from each other.
Thank you, Matthew.
Okay, now we'll wrap up as we always do at 1:30. If we have a good hour's interchange every month, I think we'll all keep coming back. And if we waffle on and ramble on and go over time, we won't. So we'll wrap up at 1:30. Michelle's just dropped a survey in the chat. If you have a moment to give us some feedback about the sessions and what's good and what could be improved, we'd really appreciate that. A few reminders: if you'd like to be Community of the Month next month or a future month, let us know at learning@collaborationforimpact.com. Particularly if you've got a cultural item you'd like to share, we'd love to hear from you. It's census night tonight, so don't forget to fill in the census. And please tell your friends about ChangeMakers on Tuesdays. There's been 3 cracking editions, and we hope we'll keep going. If we get a decent crowd like we have today, we'll definitely keep going. So we'd love to share the experience. So tell your friends, turn up again next month. For those of you who are in lockdown, hang in there, it will end. And we'll see you at 12:30 on the second Tuesday in September. The date is, what's the date, Michelle?
14th of September, just dropped in the chat.
14th of September. Thanks for joining us. Now, Michelle's going to keep the call open. So there's a bit of, if you'd like to stay and chat a bit more, you can hang on the line and talk a bit more. But I'm going to sign off, and I will see you on the 14th of September at 12:30. Thanks, everyone.